today, I think.
Okay.
And then, but I will get us through, hopefully, God willing. I will start with a joke, though. Right? This is a joke. Maybe a lot of people know this, right? The Brisker Rav is sitting around with his Talmidim, with his children. They're learning Torah. He's thirsty. He turns to Beryl. He says, "Beryl, get me a cup of tea." Beryl goes to get him a cup of tea, right? He wants to, of course, fill it up as much as he can for his father. This thing is, really kosmale of tea. And he's walking, his hand's a little bit shaky. He spills some tea on his hand and he exclaims, "Ow!" And his father gives him a patch on the head and says, "Come on, Beryl, cliche ne'eno mevashel," right? So that's look, lead us into today. But I wanted to start actually with just a question, just to kind of frame this all, because really, I think up until now we've been dealing with, in many ways, how do we do Beetle, right? How do we get to 60, as I've heard it called? And now what we're getting into today is really, what interactions do we even need to worry about, right? What does it mean when two things interact in Isur v'Heter, in terms of, like that we're worried about Beetle, might be worried about other things. So I want to start on just ask, like, what are the factors that, from having learned this, what are the factors we have to consider when an Isur and a Heter interact with each other, as to whether or not, as to how we respond? What factors are we concerned with? Just shout them out.
Well, Tom.
Maybe don't shout them out. Sarah, Ruben, and then Elish. Let's go for that. Temperature. Great. Temperature is one. Good. Ruben.
There's also Tom. That's one of them. Whether the flavor is imparted into like one of them.
Good. Does it have Tom? Good. Elish, what else do we have?
Sorry, I was just struggling with the camera, so I didn't pay attention now. But I don't know what's going on.
It's okay. We'll move on. Isaac, and then Aaron.
Sharpness, harifness.
Good. Harifness. Aaron. There's some more I'm looking for.
Wet and dry.
Good. Wet and dry. Your lach and yavesh. What else? Other factors. Yeah, Jessica.
Whether the pot has actually spent time with a primary heat source.
Good, right? What was the interaction with the pot with the heat source? Kli sheni, kli rishon, right? Questions. Good. Or if you get to Rav Moshe, kli shlishi, right? Jacob.
Also, time.
Thank you. Yes, time. Time is really what the starting factor we're going to deal with here, right? How long are they interacting with each other? All right. What else? That's a temporal one. What about a physical one? Yes, Sarah.
Which top and bottom.
Great, right?
Maybe
where
left and right.
Yeah, is the Isur or Heter on top? Is the thing that's hot or not on top, right? Are they side by side? Rav Lexi.
Somewhat jumping the gun, but fattiness.
Good, that's the other one, right? Fattiness, which we'll see, unless you're in Ashkenaz, and then it doesn't matter. But Reuven.
Well, there's bishul in certain cases.
There's bishul. What? Say again.
There's bishul in certain cases. So like basar v'challah, for example.
Good. Well, actually, I want to take that, a little bit farther, right? What kind of heating was done, right? We're going to see difference between tzli and bishul, and maybe kavush is different than those, and so forth. Good. There's at least one more factor, which may have been kind of mentioned, right? Which is maybe similar to bishul, but maybe different, which is mavleo maflit, right? Which all of those have to do with, but that's an important thing. Okay, good. One more question, just in terms of, let's say there was a problematic interaction. What possible solutions do we have, right? What's our response? Some of these show up in these seifim. Ilana, please, and then Aaron.
We could take off the klipa just to take off the edge of part of what touches these four, or kadei klipa or kadei natila to take off the width of the finger, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to stop you there just so, because Aaron wanted to jump into, and before you give us all of them, those were great, right? We have klipa, which is like a thin layer. We have kadei natila, which is like a finger's breadth. Good. Aaron, what do you have?
Hadacha.
Good. Hadacha, right? You got to wash it, right? Good. What else do we have? Ruben.
Well, separating the elements, it's like taking it out of a mixture.
Good. So taking it out, right? This is, we'll see that. That's a good one too. I don't know. The only other one, does anyone have any others besides that?
Beetle.
Right, beetle, yeah, exactly. That was where I was going to go next, right? Beetle, or right, potentially, if you can't to do that, throw it out, right? Or give it to a non-Jew, depending if you can get hana'ah from it and all that kind of stuff. So, or your dog, right? So, assuming you have a dog. Good. Anybody have any things I'm missing here? Rav Landis, looks like you want to say something.
I'm just asking, how are you picturing this? Are you having two lists and then which arrows you draw to which list, or?
Yeah, I think that's what goes on, right? Is first you see what kind of interaction it was, and then that tells you where I go on that list, right? Do I have to do Kedei Klipat? Do I have to do, Netilat Makom? Do I have to have Bitul and so forth? And so that's the way I was picturing it. Yeah. So
Okay. Do you find it necessary then to examine how strong an Easter it is on one side of the list and how efficacious or what the heck does it do on the other side?
yeah. I
Would
think
you
that-
call the solution?
exactly what I call the solution. It's I think, right, and that comes into, someone mentioned Harif. We'll also see this when we get to the Mishnah and Shvit, right, where you have a flour in oil, right, and how whether or not it's an old flour or a new flour, old bean, both also how it relates to Shvit, but also how much flavor it's capable of imparting.
Alan has a point.
Oh, good, Alan, go for it.
No, I was gonna say chemical makeup like tzir, and kavush, but I think that's equivalent to harif in some ways.
No, yeah, great. Actually, no, I meant to say that, and I'm glad you brought that up. Is when you have something in liquid, is what kind of liquid is it is going to matter too, right? That it's related to harifut, but there's going to be a big issue about, well, do all liquids impart flavor or take flavor? Do only some liquids? Do they have different amounts of time and so forth? So okay, good. So with that, I want to jump into the sources. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully Rav Nachum has given me permission to do that. And I'm going to also share the source sheet. Some people are already in it. Look at that. But just in case you don't like looking at my screen, we're going to march through some primary sources. I want to say these are not all the primary sources on this. There's a lot, to the extent that, I don't know if people noticed, but a huge missing voice in this entire thing is kind of the Rambam in a lot of this kavush thing. He never actually has this halacha, kavush kivushal, and the Aruch HaShulchan spends his first several sifim dealing with that fact. And he essentially says it's because there's so many different examples in the Gemara that it's all just based on individual cases to the Rambam, and therefore you just kind of have to know in each individual case what kind of interaction was it, did it impart flavor or not? So, okay, with that though, so let's start.
Before we get started, Rav Nachum, would you by any chance have the dial-in information for the Zoom meeting?
You're on mute, Rav Nachum.
I can look for it. I'll look for it and I'll send it in the chat.
Perfect, because I think Yavni's internet is not working, so he's looking for the dial-in information if you have them.
Okay.
Great. All right, we're going to start in Psachim here. And I don't know, Ruben, since you so bravely spoke up, if you want to read for us, Psachim Mem Daled.
No problem. Let me just open it up.
No problem.
All right, so Mem Daled Amud Bet. Okay, Rabbanan b'basar v'chalav lo gamrinan.
Okay, yeah, okay, go, perfect. Go ahead.
So Rabbanan don't learn from basar v'chalav. Why the chidushu? Because it's a chidush. Umay chidush. And what's the chidush of basar v'chalav? Ilema dehai lechude v'hai lechude shareh ubehada adade asur kilaim nami. If you tell me that the chidush is that each of them separately is permitted, and it only becomes prohibited once they're together, well, you have the same chidush in kilaim. Hai lechude v'hai lechude shareh ubehada asur. Right, you have the same idea that could be found in kilaim. Therefore, that can't be the chidush of basar v'chalav. Exactly. So we have to say that the chiddush is that if you leave it all day long in the milk, then it's permitted. However, if you start cooking it together, that's when it becomes asur.
Great. So, of course, what can we learn from this about things that are not basar b'chalav, where you have a case of one, like a solid sitting in a liquid for a whole day?
Well, you would then assume that then it's asur, right?
Exactly.
The extra step of bishul is only relevant to basar v'chalav, and that's the chiddush.
Exactly. So, and just for completion's sake, read the Rashi for us, Tarule.
1 second, let me just find it. Basar bechalav chidush tarule shurao bechalav kol hayom sharei. If he leaves it in milk all day, then it's permitted. כלומר, מותר לשרות בתוכו ואין עובר עליו אפילו על אכילתו. Why is it not עובר על אכילתו? דלא אסחה תורה אלא דרך בישול. ואפילו יהיב בטעמה ומיהו בדרבנן אסור. Right, so even if there is the taste of milk that's embedded in the meal, sorry, in the meat, it's still permitted, deoraita, it's only asur derabanan. Because deoraita, it's only once you cook them together that it becomes asur.
Great. And per this Rashi, right? What level of isur then would there be on? I don't know if I put a piece of, let's say for the moment, pork and milk, and left it there all day potentially. Could be anybody.
Derabanan.
If I put pork in milk,
No, that's the right.
yeah, that's probably deraita, right? It sounds like only basar b'chalav is derabanan, and everything else is deraita. That's how I'm understanding this for the moment. I don't know if anybody has other thoughts on this.
Technically,
Go ahead,
isn't
Ruben.
that basar bechalav as well?
Say again.
Isn't that basar bechalav as well to a certain extent? Well, yeah, my bad, sorry.
No, it's not because that's potentially because pork and milk is not in the basar b'chalav, kind of world. So okay, good. We're just one more source on this. I wanted to see the Meiri, the Beit Bechira. Maybe Alana, do you want to read? Oh, you're on mute. So.
Okay. Ella, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Ella dei tar lehu kule yoma bechalva shari shari midoraita af b'chdei bliat ze mize kegon she'ira chalav cham mikli rishon lekli sheni v'natan basar betocho shelo asra Torah ela derech bishul ukli sheni af al pi shehu maflit umavlia eino mevashel. Okay, so the isur with basar and chalav is bishul and not blia. So if you soak something all day, in milk, then midoraita. If you soak meat in milk all day, then deoraita, it's okay. Because all that's happening is blia and not bishul. And if you pour hot milk from a kli rishon into a kli sheni, and then you put meat in that kli sheni, there's never bishul in a kli sheni. So again, it's not a sur doraita because you can't have bishul in a kli sheni.
Exactly. Even though to the area there is flavor transfer in a kli sheni, right? As far as
maflitu mavlia, but not mevashel.
Exactly. So, which is also very interesting, right? So there's no bishul happening, but there is flavor transfer. Maybe he's making a distinction. We'll see again between these two things, right? The Meiri, it's important to know, right, isn't either known to the Beit Yosef or never at least listed in the Beit Yosef as far as we know. So this, of course, his thing here won't necessarily directly come into the halachic conversation, but it's, still an interesting summary of it. So, Rav Nachum.
Yeah, you're making a very nice dichotomy here between the Torah has a specific prohibition of bishul by basar b'chalav. And that's a particular thing. It's almost like a magical word, bishul. And we have to define when that happens, when it doesn't happen. And it has absolutely nothing to do with whether there's flavor transfer, because there's many ways that flavor can transfer that don't categorize themselves as bishul. That's a very nice way of, what you're proposing, what you're showing, what the Meiri is showing and what you're showing is very nice. It's a very nice division between these two concepts of flavor and bishul.
Yeah. It might also come into the distinction between Hilchot Shabbat and Hilchot Isur Heter too, right here, of like something could be potentially create an Isur, but not be over on Mevashel Shabbat, right? Because there was no Bishul, but it did transfer flavor. And those are not necessarily, right? Because the Isur on Shabbat is Bishul and not necessarily flavor transfer. I don't want to we'll see. This comes out of like this whole question that shows up in even already in the Achronim, really, of like, is there a distinction between what causes transfer of flavor and what is Asur on Shabbat or not? So, but okay, good. Avoda, I want to go to Avoda Zara because this is going to give us maybe a little bit of a different take on things, and this might look like a practice that people have seen for Pesach to some extent. Rev Landis, were you about to say something? Oh, you're on mute.
Well, are there any people that see that definitionally, that bishul is the bishul means flavor transfer, or no one says that?
I believe that, if I remember correctly, even the Beit Yosef at some point suggests that. I don't think,
Well,
I think he might back out of it.
Even the
seems-
Gemara kind of does, right? Like,
Right.
remember we talk about that when we talk about Basar V'chalav and about the like Derech Bishul Asra Torah, that's part of the proof as to why it's only Asr if it's Noten Tam, because they see those as like inextricably linked.
Mhm.
But that would see Bishul means Tam transfer, but not Tam transfer means
No.
Bishul.
It's necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Yeah.
Okay.
Necessary to have
No,
a transfer.
it's sufficient,
Don't-
but not necessary.
I wouldn't forget this right now. In other words, I would make this an ongoing issue.
Yeah. So we'll leave it in the background a little bit then. I like that.
Okay.
Okay, good. And with that, let's move on to the Gemara and Avodah Zarah. Alexi, you want to read for us here?
Sure. Bar Aretai Anas Han Hizike Merav Yitzchak Bar Yosef Ram Bahu Chamra Vahadrinu Nihale. So this Bar Adi, who is like an Arab traveler, like stole these Zike were these like containers, right? These kind of like drink containers from Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, and just tosses some wine in there, as one is wont to do, and then returns them to him. Just like trapes up his containers and then gives them back. Ata Shail Be Midrasha. So he goes to the Beit Midrasha and asks, what's the deal with my zikim? Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah, Chachara Rabbi Ami, Halach Lamase, Melin Maim Shlosha Yamim U Ma'aran. So this is what Rabbi Ami said: fill up these containers with water for 3 days and then pour them out. Presumably, then it'll be fine. The Amar Rava Tzarich Laran Me'etz Le'etz. So Rava says you actually need to like pour them out and then refill them every 24 hours. So presumably, like, you fill them up, pour them out after 24 hours, and you do that until you've had them full for 3 days.
Yeah. And so, it's important. I probably should have mentioned, I didn't bring the sugya on this, but right, we have a general concept of kebol o kach polto, right? As it absorbs flavor, that so too it gets rid of flavor, right? And this here seems to imply that maybe there's a 3-day factor going on here when you have liquid in a kli, that it takes 3 days for it to maybe transfer flavor and 3 days to get rid of that flavor as well, right? If those two things parallel each other. So, and people may know this, right? This is a practice that comes in not only in cases of getting rid of the flavor of Avodah Zarah wine, but for I think it's originally suggested by the Chai Adam, if I'm not mistaken, right? On Pesach for your glasses, since in Ashkenaz maybe we don't kosher glass, but maybe we need them, so that putting your glass in water for 3 days and every day changing the water out. And this is the way to prepare glass for Pesach. For some people have this custom. And then your bathtub is, unusable for 3 days. It's all good. So,
Every caterer does this.
So
they fill up the sinks, all sinks. Almost every caterer I know of does this.
I mean, I assume only in Ashkenaz, right? And the Sephardic
Yeah. There they just wash it.
Yeah, they wash it off.
They wash and leave it. They mashmer, they leave it for a day. Wash and leave it for a day.
So, all right. With that, I want to look now. There's a Mishnah in Shvi'it. I think that will be important to us, just in terms of this whole question that we're dealing with. People didn't notice about, right? Two substances, maybe a solid residing in a cold liquid for a period of time. And so just the background of this, just to remind people, see if I get this right, when you have Shvi'it produce from the Shemitah year, once everything in the field of that produce is gone, you have to burn it, anything that remains in your house, right? It requires biur. And so that's what we're going to deal with here. This Mishnah, by the way, is incredibly like unclear as to exactly what's going on. And the Yerushalmi actually has very different, it suggests different versions to try and fix it up. So maybe I'll help with that a little bit. But including one of his attempts is to essentially say, we're dealing with two different Tanaim in this Mishnah. Lexi, you want to take this Mishnah as well?
Sure. Also, right, with Bior, just as with Bior Chametz, you don't technically have to burn, you just have to like get completely rid of some way or another. Okay, so Vered Chadash, Kavsha B'Shemen Yashan, Ilket Tavered, Ve'Yashan B'Chadash.
Actually, we'll stop with that piece right there.
Right. So, right, and this is talking when we have the Yashan V'Chadash referring to obviously when these things are grown within the Shvit cycle. So a new rose that was, well, pickled is the wrong word, but like left for a long period of time in this old oil, I don't remember exactly what it means, but you like you take out the rose, right? This
way is usually meant to, at least the way the Rambam understands this, I'll jump in here, is that you take it out, you're fine, right? And the idea here, he understands it in his Pirush al Mishnah is, and also in the Mishnah Torah, as
the rose doesn't have to be gotten rid of.
Exactly. Well, yeah, no, the rose is actually a Shvi'i rose as far as he's concerned, and the Shemen is Shishit Shemen, right? And you take out the rose and the Shemen is fine. And the idea is that a new rose isn't a strong enough flavor to impart any flavor into the Shemen so far. So
right. So the oil, which like isn't chayav in bior because it's shishi or previous, is fine because it doesn't have any rose flavor, and so fine. And then our next section, it says the yashan bechadash chayav bebior. If you have a old rose, like a rose, aka that is not a shvi'it rose, in like new shvi'it oil, the rose is chayav and bior because we assume that the oil has imparted flavor to the rose.
Exactly.
And then charuvin charashim shekavshan beyain yashan ve'yeshnim bechadash chayavim bebior. So carobs that are shvi'it carobs that have been left for a long time in older wine, and vice versa. In both those cases, we think that like flavor is imparted from one to the other, such that they are chayav in bior. And then zaklal kol she'ibn tam chayav leva'er. Right. So like any case where flavor is imparted to the thing from the shvi'it produce to what it was initially non-shvi'it produce, now that is also chayav to get rid of it. Min b'she'eno mino, min b'mino kol she'u shvi'it oseret kol she'b'mina v'shelo b'mina b'noten tam. Right. And then when it's like bimino, it seems to imply that it's like stam, right? But just like at all, if you have any kind of mixture, makes it usser, aka needs to be removed. Then it just repeats seemingly the benotain tam.
Yeah. This isn't, I have to say, that Rebbe Yehuda Nassi's, not that I'd ever criticize him, but this is his best writing in this Mishnah. But or maybe it's his best and he really wants to tip us off to something. I'm not sure. So, but good. And I just want to point out just a couple of factors here, right? It sounds like oil, which is not something we think of as a harif liquid necessarily. At least I wouldn't, but it does matter if the flour is harif, whatever kind of flour you think of there it is. And no time factor is given here, right? But there seems to be, even though it's a cold interaction, there seems to be an idea that flavor can impart from one to the other. So good. Any thoughts or questions on this Mishnah before we move on?
So if I understand correctly from the Mishnah, imparting the taste is good enough to transfer the Isur from one product to another, right?
Exactly.
So it's basically restating that Tam Kikar.
Yes, yeah. So at least in terms of Shvit, right? Whether or not it applies to everything else is a whole nother question. And I mean, we know we spend a lot of time on Tam Kikar in general, but so Rav Nachum.
Yeah, where do you see harifut in coming into play here?
Yeah, it's fair. I don't directly see it here. It's the Beit Yosef is going to bring it. Is the Beit Yosef, not only him, several people are going to bring it up as a question of whether against Rashi, who's suggested only sharp liquids have flavor transfer to them, and this is going to be the Mishnah that's going to be their ammunition against that. So,
and the old oil and the new oil is just whether it's shvit or not shvit, right?
That's
and
how most
flour. And the new
Yeah.
flour is also shvi'it or not shvi'it, right?
Exactly. So,
Right. Okay.
But okay, good. With that, we're going to actually shift a little bit topic wise, but I want to get all our background sources in here. So this is I would say, I like to call it a famous debate, but maybe it's not a famous debate between Rav and Shmuel. Oh, Lana, you already read. Hold on, I got to scroll down here. Maybe Jacob, you want to read this Gemara here in Psachim?
Sure. Itmar, cham l'tocham divrei kol asur. Zonin l'toch zonin divrei kol mutar. Cham l'toch zonin v'zonin l'toch cham. Rav Amar Ila Gavar, Shmuel Amar Tata Gavar. Those stated if it's something warm within something warm, everyone agrees that's prohibited. Something cold within something cold, everyone agrees that it's permissible. And then warm into cold and cold into warm. Rav says that the upper flavor, the thing that's, I guess, added to another, is stronger and overpowers. And Shmuel says that the lower is stronger and overpowers.
Exactly. So good,
Yeah.
right? So far we have this debate as to, in other words, if you have a hot thing and a cold thing together, does the upper thing or the lower thing determine if it's a hot interaction or not, right? And behind this is sitting is that a hot interaction has some flavor transfer, some cooking, something like that, right? So
Yeah.
okay, good.
John?
Keep going.
John?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, someone had a question. Go ahead. Is it
Yes.
Alan?
Yeah, very basic, but I think important question. Where has Noten Tam and Shishin gone in this discussion? Is this such that the criterion of Noten Tam applies? Okay, what exactly is going on?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is and we'll already see that the Gemara is going to have some issues already with some of the questions going on here. But I think there's really just a question of did flavor transfer or not, is the way we're going to frame it eventually. So yeah, it's a great, I mean, this is, and Alan, I think you're hitting on some of the problem here is, what we're dealing with is, several, both Mishnayot, Memrot, Braitot that are kind of written in a very kind of opaque manner where they're not giving us all the factors, and we're trying to put all these factors together into one, theory of food interactions.
But
Well, Alan, how would you like Tam Livgam to be stuck in this Mishnah, in this Gemara? Because where would it come into play?
I don't know. If we're gonna say, well, Cham Betzonen doesn't transfer flavor, then what do we do with the entire tipa, chaticha neset nevela? Are those all only happening in cham b'cham situations? There could be. I generally don't know the.
Yeah, I know.
Or it's soden and cham, right? Like a tipa would probably be cold if it's falling from not actually, well, whatever, it could be splashing from another pot, but even if it falls from like your milk carton, if that falls onto a hot piece of meat, then it's fine.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that the Aruch HaShulchan, who I use for some of this background here, just to help me understand a lot of this, is he actually is convinced that this whole discussion is only a factor of solids into liquids. And the moment you get kind of liquids into liquids, the flavor everything gets mixed together anyway. So there's like, obviously, doesn't matter if it's cham or tzonen at that point. But it was kind of an interesting point. Does that help, Alan? Is it?
I hear the question, but it does call into doubt basically everything we've learned up until this point, right? Like what case were we talking about in Siman?
You have to make certain assumptions here. For instance, if everything is consistent, sonen l'toch sonen, divrei kol mutar. Well, not if it sits there for 24 hours, maybe, or 72 hours, or whatever that time factor is, or if one of the sonanim is seer, or going to get all of this. So this is obviously, this mission is talking about a particular, it's not Beimra, sorry, it's a Memra. It's talking about a particular set of cases, right? That we can assume, maybe the Stam case, which is, just regular normal food, nothing harif, isn't a long interaction, so forth, which is, but I think, I hear you in that this is very detail-less in this case.
And presumably,
Go for it. Was it, who did I hear? Sorry, I couldn't.
I was going to say, presumably, if it's a sore, right, you can still do bitul. If you can do bitul b'shishim, you do, right? Like,
great. Yes, exactly. And we're actually going to see even, right, if it's sonen, but sonen, it's not like you just take it out and eat it, right? Maybe there's some other thing we have to do to fix it up here. So
right. Also, just to clarify that you still have to. This is only in the case of once you've already taken it out and you're trying to figure out whether the. Right.
Obviously,
but not,
also is an important factor here, and yeah, Rav Nahum. Okay, I thought you wanted to say something. Sorry. So, okay, good. I don't remember. Jacob, were you reading? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, keep going for us.
Yeah. Tanya Kavate de Shmuel. Cham l'to cham asor v'chein sonein shenatan l'to cham asor. Cham l'to sonein v'tsonein l'to sonein mediach. Cham l'to sonein mediach kevan de cham hu adamekar le efsar de lo b'la porta klipa. Miha
Nibaya. Right. In other words, right. Just I just I'm gonna just to push us through this a little bit, right? It says, wait a second, right? You just wash it off, right? If it's hot, as it cools it down, it's got to absorb some amount, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got to at least do klipa, whatever klipa is, right? Which will okay. So Ela Emma, keep going.
Emma chamatoch sonin kolef sonin latoch sonin mediach. So yeah.
So we fix up this breita here, right? That we say, okay. Great.
Yeah. Tanya idach basar roteach shnafal toch roteach v'chein sonin shnafal toch cham as or cham latoch sonin v'sonin latoch sonin mediach cham latoch sonin mediach kevan de cham hu.
You have to read it. Cham latoch sonin mediach kevan de.
Kevan de cham hu adamekar le ef sardelo bala porta. Klipa miani bai. Ella ema chamatoch zonin kolef zonin latoch zonin mediach.
Good. Right. So give us the summary of the breita. These two different versions of the breita here.
So yeah. So the first one, it's going into. It's agreeing with Shmuel that Tata, like if the lower thing is the stronger. So if it's when the lower thing is Cham, then that's when it's Asur. But then we have the conversation about, if it needs Mediach or Klipa in other cases. And then the other version of the Breita is
it's a Basar B'chalav interaction, right? It's a similar idea though. It's the same concepts, right?
Right.
So good, just to play it out, right? So then we have from this, right? Sonen mitoch sonen, we just have to wash it off. If it's cham mitoch sonen, we have to do klipa, and if it's sonen l'toch cham, we have to, then it's our normal rules of Isur apply, right? Because tatag afar. And this is just to remind people, right? I'm sure people know this, but generally when it's a machloket Rav v'Shmuel, but Isur, we say halacha kerav. However, this is the case. I don't know if we'll get to see all the text on it, but because Shmuel has a breita that supports him, we generally say the halacha is per Shmuel in this case, right? Actually, it has two breitot that support him, so even better than one. Good. Any thoughts, questions, anything I missed? I'm also not keeping up well with the chat, so if anyone put anything there that needs to be said, please. Okay. One last Gemara and one last Tosfot, and then we'll be done with what I've determined are enough primary sources, although there's not enough. There's so many in this topic and these topics. So this is from Bavli Chulin. Maybe Aaron, you want to read for us?
Amar Shmuel, Lo shanu elashni bashel ba, aval nitla ba, kolef leochel ad shemagir legid. This is
This,
about
just to get the background, which might be obvious, is question of would you cook, meat with the gid hanasha here. So
Ini, Bahamar Rav Huna, Gedish tzla'o b'chalbo, asur la'achol afilu marosh ozna. Is that really so? Just to translate, Shmuel said this this robot cooking is only when it's actually cooked mamash, but if it's roasted, you can cut till you get to the gid and then sort of like take the gid out.
exactly.
Is that really the case? I.e., is there a significant difference between bishul and sliya here?
Well, I think
It
I think it means that you eat until you reach the gid. In other words, you just sort of munch on it until you get to the gid, and then you just stop munching once you hit the gid.
Right. So in other words, the flavor doesn't impart through tzliya, right?
Right.
That's what it
Exactly. Or it only imparts kidei klipa, maybe, right? Maybe there's like a fat
Right, you
last
stop
layer. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, but as opposed to if you do bishul with the thigh and the gid, then the whole thing is either asur or needs 60 against it, right? Is the idea. So, but all right, good. Aaron, keep going for us.
Well,
a little bit. Sorry, Rav Nachum, go for it, please.
Well, after I said that, I'm just wondering what it means. Kolef ve'ochel ad shemagir. Maybe you're peeling off layers. Maybe that's what it is. You're peeling off layers and eating that layer, and then you peel off another layer, and then you peel off a layer, and then you see the gid, and now you stop peeling off layers, and now you can't eat anymore.
Yeah, and maybe even potentially you can't eat that last layer that you peeled once you see the.
And maybe that last layer you can't eat either.
Yeah,
although it doesn't
in other
say.
words, because we're worried all the time that we've hit the bottom.
Mhm.
Exactly. You're not going to just start munching on it. You're going to peel off layers, and then until you're right. Exactly. It's like you check your dates before you eat them.
Exactly. So, but seems like a slow way to eat it, but it means that you haven't thrown out the entire thing. So, okay, Aaron, go back to the ini. So we questioned this, and what was Rav Huna's statement that challenged us?
But didn't Rav Huna say that if you cook a goat with its forbidden fat, you can't eat any part of it. Sorry, not cook. If you roast it with forbidden fat, you can't eat any part of it, which suggests that the act of roasting moves the fat around, which would seem to suggest that roasting with something that has a gid and ashe in it should have the same role. Shani chaylev mafafea. So actually, chaylev is a different case because it moves around in a way that other things don't. It is the substance itself moves.
It seems to be right. There's maybe a parallel going on here. It's just my understanding of that. Bishul, which involves liquid, right, which moves things around. Fat can do the same thing. Fat internally to something when you roast it can act like an internal liquid that moves around flavor. So, okay, but now we're
going asur, but is even that actually asur at all? V'hamar Rabba bar Chana, uvda hava kamei Rabbi Yochanan b'knista d'ma'on b'gdish shetzla'o b'chalbo va'atu v'shayluha Rabbi Yochanan v'amar kolef ochel ad shemagir l'chalbo. Didn't Rabba bar Chana say there is a situation that happened with Rabbi Yochanan in the Beit Knesset of Ma'on? They brought him a gdi that had been roasted with its forbidden fat. They gave it to him, and he said, "Peel and eat until you get to its chaylev," which is the same as actually what Shmuel said about gid and ashe. How kachushava? Well, that's because it was a very skinny gdi, so it didn't have a lot of fat.
Great.
Rav Huna bar Yehuda Amar. Kulia bechal bahava. Visharia. It was actually about its kidney was in the fat. I forget exactly what the
Yeah, it was saying the case wasn't actually that they roasted the whole gedi.
Right.
It was a case of the
There-
kunya was roasted, the kidney was roasted in the chalev, and he permitted it. And this is less of our topic, but I just wanted to include it. But right, is because there's a membrane around
Oh,
the
there's a dividing line with the.
yeah, and so that might be why he permits it. So, and they've got a third version of what this case actually was.
Ravim Barav Ada Amar, Kilki Be'il Pishava. It was actually just a tame fish in a pan.
Yeah.
So it had nothing to do with any of this. Vati Shailuha Rabbi Yochanan Va'amar Lahu Lita Me Kapila Irma. And so he said, have a non-Jew taste it.
This is what gets us into that whole sugya, by the way, of non-Jews tasting, and the whole question. Rabbi Yochanan said 60, Rabbi Yochanan said flavor, Rabbi Yochanan said taste, right? So okay, good. That's just, to point out the point, the thing here is that we seem to have the factor of how do we cook it? Is it bishul or tzli? And then we also have the factor of, if it is tzli, was it a fatty or lean substance or meat that was being roasted in the first place? So all those are potential
And
questions.
Joel, how do you think this Gemara comes out as far as the fatty, as the din on the fatty meat?
Great. I mean, I think it comes out with the din that fatty meat becomes like bishul at that point. But non-fatty meat doesn't. And we have to, of course, be able to differentiate, which is going to be a huge question when we get to the modern psak on this, right? Can we differentiate? Maybe Rabbi Yochanan knew what he was doing, but maybe we don't necessarily. So, but okay, good. One more thing, and just to get us into the Rishon Kli Sheni question, Tosfot Shabbat Mem Amud Bet. Jessica, you want to read for us?
Sure. Okay. Ushmamina klisheni elamavashem. Tema. Maishana klisheni mikli rishon. Di yad suletitba afilu klisheni nami. Being ein yad suletitba afilu kli rishon nami. Elamavashem. Yeshama lefisha kli rishon mitach she'amad al ha'or dofnav chamin. ומחזית חומה זמן מרובה. ולכך, נתנו בשיעור דכל זמן שהיד סולדת בו אסור. אבל כלי שני, אף אגב שתיד סולדת בו, מותר שאין דופנותיו חמין והולך ומתקרב.
Great. Now explain it to us.
Okay, so we learn from this that things don't cook in a klisheni. And we get this question of like, what do you mean things don't cook in a klisheni? Like things cook if they're hot. If it's hot enough to be yad soledet bar, it should cook. It doesn't matter whether it's a kli rishon or a kli sheni. And the way Tosfot explain it is they say that no, because a kli sheni has been like in the like literal fire for longer, its walls retain the heat for a much longer time. And so it transfers heat differently. Whereas a kli sheni that hasn't had its walls, like the walls of the kli sheni are going to be significantly cooler. So even if the kli sheni is momentarily hotter, it won't transfer heat and taste in the same way.
Exactly, right? So I have my hot soup in my kli rishon, and I put something else to interact with it. The walls of the kli rishon are helping with that heat interaction to mix the flavors, right? But if I now pour that soup into a kli sheni and then I have the interaction with it, that while that substance is in the soup, the walls of the kli sheni are cooling the soup or cooling this whole mixture, and so it's a different kind of interaction, even though the temperature might be the same for both of them.
Right.
So, good, Ruben, please.
The only thing I found really odd in this Tosfot is the last sentence, "V'holech umitkarer." Like, realistically speaking, even Kil Rishon, the walls are holech umitkarer down the line, right? You take it off the fire, like you leave it aside for like 20, 30 minutes, the walls are not going to be as warm as when you started.
I think the idea is that what's inside goes on to get colder, right? That like in a kli rishon, it's retaining the heat in the walls, which is then keeping the food hotter. Whereas in a kli sheni, since the walls aren't retaining the heat, the food is going and getting colder at a faster pace.
Yeah, that's how I understand it as well. It's
Makes sense.
So I'm just realizing now, going over the material, like the fundamental question is then, are the Tosfot distinguishing on the basis that a kli rishon just happens to be hotter and that the essential factor is the heat, Or is it that there's some like fundamental difference between the Kli Rishon and the Kli Sheni, such that the Kli Rishon is always a problem and the Kli Sheni is never a problem?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, this Tosfot is both, I think, wonderful and also hard to understand exactly what mechanism is going on here. It maybe becomes even harder when you try to scientifically break down this Tosfot to some extent. But I think it's a really powerful Tosfot in the sense of, right, there is something different between when the Kli itself was on the fire versus when the food was on the fire, but in a different Kli. So, okay. Good. Any final thoughts on this source before we move on? We don't have time. Okay, maybe now, unless there's any questions, maybe now's a good time to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll go to Tur Beit Yosef Shulchan Aruch. So. All right.
Thank you for teaching so far, Joel.
All right, here's what we're going to do for the rest. I think here's my strategy. I kind of wrote myself a note. I was like, we're going to do the sources, and then I'm going to figure out how much of the Tur Beit Yosef and the Nosei Kelim of the Shulchan Aruch we're going to do. But I think I'm going to read the Tur. We're going to go piece by piece, and I'll have someone read the parts of the Beit Yosef. And really, we'll start with kavush, really this question of like what counts as it, what is its actual deen. So we'll start with Aleph so everyone turn to the Tur. We're in Siman Kuf Hey, the later added Seifim breakdown in Seif Aleph in the Tur. So I'll read. But Kol Hadin, Shenoheg Be'isur Shnitarev Beheter Al Yedei Bishul, Kach Dino Im Nichbash Betocho Yom Shalem Me'it La'esh. De Kavush Dino Kimvushal. Aval Pachot Miyom, Sagi Ba'alma. So he says, right, all the rules that we have of mixing a heter with an isur through cooking, it's the same rules if you, I don't even know what pickling is like the wrong word, but it's the best I have for the moment. If you soak it, maybe soaking for in it for a full day. Marinate. Oh, I like that. Does that work? Is that marinate also implies to me a particular liquid, but I'll go with it. Marinate it for a 24-hour period, because right, kavush, this thing called kavush is called, we're calling marinating. Its rule is like bishul. But if it's less than a day, right, since it is cold, it is sufficient to just wash it off, to merely wash it off. All right, that's the kind of the basis. We've kind of seen this a little bit, but now I want to look at the Beit Yosef, in starting with Aleph in the Beit Yosef. Maybe let's see who hasn't read. Andres, you want to read for us?
Sorry, Rav Joel, before we move forward, so what exactly does the Tur mean by mevushal, right? Because like, does it mean like it's edible, like you're able to eat it because it's cooked, or like is there something else to it? Because like, if it's non-charif liquid, like it's not really marinated, right? It's like it's just like it imparts flavors. So like, is mevushal mean like you could eat it, or does it mean like the flavor is considered to be part of it and being?
Good. It seems to be mevushal here means just like when you cook it, right? This is the whole question, is like kem mevushal, right? Just like when you cook it, there is a mixture of the isur and heter, such that all the other rules we've been learning up until now apply, right? Same thing here. If you leave it in liquid for 24 hours, but not on fire, not on top of a heat source, that also has the same rules. But I will say this is, as I was putting these sources together last week, my daughter, she took a piece of dried spaghetti that you have to cook. She put it in a cup of water. She was using it as a straw, and she left it in there. It didn't even take 24 hours, and I came back like later the next morning, and sure enough, I pulled the little piece of spaghetti. It was kind of disgusting, but it was in this cold thing of water, and it looked like it was kind of edible. So I don't know exactly, but this sounds like it. But the rules are the same, right? Here we're really dealing with the halachic category of when is it called a tarovet, right? Yes, cold brew spaghetti, indeed. So, okay. So Andres, take the Beit Yosef for us.
The beginning.
Yeah, from the beginning.
Okay. בפרק גיד הנשה ובכמה דוך תה מליח, הרי הוא כרותח. כבוש, הרי הוא כמבושל. So that source we didn't read, no?
We didn't see this. I didn't give you every source. So.
Oh, okay. ובפרק בהתרא דעבודה זרה גבי יחברא דשכחה כתב הראש תימא דהי, how do you say שיכרא או
Shikra. Is the
Shikra.
yeah.
וחלה צונן הם, למה נעזרו בנפילת העכבר? ויש לומר ששהה בו זמן מרובה, והבה לי כמין כבוש, ונפלט טעמו בשכר ובחומץ. Should I translate or you tell me?
Yeah, good. Even though we're in the middle of the Russia, translate for us, or give us a general, give us a gist. Don't give us the word-for-word translation if you can.
So the question is, when we last week about the mouse that fell in the beer or in the chometz, in the, how do you say chometz? In the
Vinegar.
In the vinegar, how both were cold, so it shouldn't be asur. So what was the reason? And they say, oh, because it was there for a zman merubeh, for a long time. And then it happens that he imparted the flavor. Okay.
Exactly. So, and this matches this principle we have in the Gemara of kavush harehu kimvushal, right? This is good. And if this came up last week, but if anyone was wondering when you see that, so wait a second, it's like cold interaction, right? Why are we even worried about this mouse? Here it is, right? It sat there for a long time. Right? It is probably fairly realistic, right? You probably open up the beer to pour it out or to ladle it out, and oh my gosh, there's a mouse in there. You have no clue how long it's been in there, or we'll get into the fake questions at some point. But okay, keep going.
ולא פירוש התורה,
התוספות, לא פירשו התוספות.
כמה יעמוד בחומץ ובשכר נחשבי כבוש כמבושל. So we don't know how much time it was there.
In other words, we have these principles in the Gemara, this principle in the Gemara, we have the Rosh, but no one's told us, well, wait a second, like how long? If cold for 5 minutes, is that a problem? For 2 hours? We have no clue what the length of time is. So he's going to have an answer.
ושמעתי בשם רצפה, דאם שעה בתוכו יום שלם, מעת לעת נקרא כבוש, ובולע ופולט כמבושל. So he says, מעת לעת 24 hours, like the רצפה. בראיה מדאמרינן בכולי בשר בחלב חידוש הוא דאיתרי לכולי יומא בחלבה שרי ויבשיל ליסו. And we learn this from the בשר בחלב, this doesn't happen to them. ומה חידוש הוא? כל איסורין שבתורה נמי דינן כך דצונן בצונן לא מתייסר ולא בלע, אלא ודאי זהו חידושו דכל איסורין שבתורה אף על גב דצונן בצונן לא בלע אם שרעו יום שלם, נאסר מטעם כבוש, ובבשר וחלב חידוש הוא דאינו נאסר.
אלא דרך בישול.
אלא דרך בישול, עד כאן לשון. וכך כתב גם כן בפרק...
Maybe I'll just summarize for a second here. He says, so how long is it? What's the reach by get? We saw that case, right, that there's a chidush of basar bechalav, right, that if one resides in the other for a day, that there's no isur, they're at least deraita. And he says, well, what chidush is it? Any cold interaction, there's no transfer. It must be that after a full day there is flavor interaction, and it's just in basar b'chalav that because the derech bishul asra Torah, that it's not asur deraita, but everything else would be. And this, by the way, makes kavush a deraita level isur at this point. So, okay. Good, but
this just point out, this is a maximum. This is saying that for sure kibush happens after a day. It might also happen less than a day, because the Gemara is just saying, if it would have been a full day, that would have for sure been kibush, and yet it would be mutter if it's basar b'chalav midoraita, and therefore, but maybe also half a day. It also makes bishul. The Gemara just took that maybe example as a certain case.
So if it's gone for a full day, then for sure in every other case it's asur, but not in basar b'chalav. So great. Okay, but now we have the Mordechai.
וכך כתב גם כן בפרק הם העמידים, והמרדכי כתב שם בשם רבנו תם, בשעה 3 ימים הווה ככבוש, והביא ראיה מפרק אלו עוברין, וכך כתב בפרק
פרק ב' דביצה,
וזה לשונו, נראה דכבוש מקרה ששעה כבר 3 ימים בדבר לך, ואז הווה כמבושל. ופולט טעם וקולט טעם, כדאמרינן בעבודה זרה, קנקנים של גויים, ממלאים 3 ימים, ומארך מעת לעת, וכפולטו כך בולעו. מה בולטו 3 ימים? אף בולעו 3 ימים. והיינו כדאמרין דקאמר בעבודה זרה.
Actually, I'm going to stop you there. We're going to skip for a second here because this is just sets up the debate that I want to set up here, right? Which is that, you know, and all the sides are going to play out here of whether or not it's 3 days or 1 day, right? And this is going to be our thing between the Mordechai and the Rosh, essentially. So, and then different people will take different sides. And, you know, I'll just, you know, we see on the tour and the Shulchan Aruch is going to rule the same way. That if we're going to follow the Me'et La'et standard, not the 3-day standard. So, all right, but it's also important to know the 3-day standards out there. But I'm going to skip you forward a little bit, Andres, to Vechatava Mordechai Od.
בכתבה מרדכי עוד שם, בכל מקום פירש רש"י, כבוש בחומץ, אבל בלא חומץ אינו כמבושל. So he's saying this only applies to strong things like חומץ, ואי אפשר לומר כך, דתנן, פרק ז' דשביעית, ורד ישן שכבשו בשמן חדש חייב, בביאור, עלמא, בלא חומץ הוא נותן טעם כמבושל. So here, because we're speaking about shemen, and it also happens, we don't agree with the opinion that says that this would only apply to chometz, like Rashi says.
Exactly. Good. Okay, so I want to stop there. That's the second debate I want to set up. That if you have Rashi thinks that this idea of kavush kimbushal only applies to particular liquids that are sharp, but this Mishnah in Shvit seems to disprove Rashi's shita here, because it seems to happen in other liquids. And also brings up, right, if you remember our case with basar b'chalav, right, that's also, it's in milk, right? That's also not a charif liquid. It's not tzir or chometz or something like that. And it seems to be that 24 hours is an important idea. And so I want to actually jump a little bit. I apologize, I'm jumping a little bit in the Beit Yosef, not the way we usually do it, but want to cover a lot. So if people look, I have another Dibor Matchil with it in the same, under Aleph, Kavush B'tzir, Katav HaRosh. Andres, you're doing so well. I'm gonna keep you going here. Just maybe a couple more thumbs up. I saw Alana has it. Everybody else have it? Oh, great. Awesome. Andres, I'm assuming that you have it, but I don't know for sure. It's for me, I mean, there's different copies of the Shirat Devora out there, but it's like the fourth wide lines in that page.
כבוש בציר. אוקיי, כבוש בציר, כתב הראש, בסוף פרק כל הבשר, דשיעורו הווה כאילו נתנו על האור כדי שירתיח ויתחיל לבשל, נכבש בתוך הציר, כשיעור זה נאסר כל מה שבתוך הציר. ובפחות משיעור זה לא נאסר, אלא כדי קליפה, כדי מליח, הרי היא כרותח. עד כאן לשם. ומשם נלמוד לכבוש בחומץ, שעד שישעה כשיעור זה אינו אוסר, אלא כדי קליפה. So this is like the minimum to do klipa, something like that?
Well, good. So the Rosh, right, is saying here, right, he says, if it is something like tzir, right, maybe something that has acid in it or something that's sharp, right, that there, what's the amount of time? It's not a day. It's rather how much time, if you took that same combination of the thing in the liquid and put it on a fire, how long would it take to get hot? That's how long you can sit in there before there's full flavor transfer into it. If it's less than that, then you just have to do klipa. So, right, so let's pretend for a minute it takes, you know, half an hour to heat up that liquid with the thing in it. Then 30 minutes of residing in it cold would be enough to consider it a full interaction. a full problematic interaction. Less than that, I just have to do K'dei Klipa on the object that's in the sear.
When it's vinegar.
Yeah, well, when it's sear. Let's actually
it's
here it's
sear.
probably, yeah, brine is the right word, I think, right? And which is going to be a big question that's going to sit out there is, do chometz and sear have the same din or not?
We have two categories. We have category of things that are sear, which is got this unusual shiur, which is sometimes referred in modern poskim as 18 minutes, which is, how long it takes to boil it up. And then we have the regular shear of things that are not sear, which is 24 hours.
Exactly. So, and really the question then is going to be, now that we've settled on this, although we're going to have a little bit more about it, is the question of, for any given liquid, which category does it fit into? Does it fit into sear, or does it fit into stam liquids, right? So, but okay, great. And just take us through the
Sorry,
next
just a quick question.
Yeah, please, Ruben.
So,
yeah.
Per the Mordechai and Rashi, sear would not be considered like chometz, right? So you wouldn't have kavush kemevushal in the case of sear.
Well, it's Rashi doesn't say what he thinks about. He just says chometz. He doesn't, whether or not he thinks sear is chometz would be another question. It sounds like he probably does, but Rav Lexi, please.
Well, right. Also, to be clear, with sear, you do have kavush mevushal. It's just that the kavush is much, much quicker, right? As opposed to being 24 hours. Yeah, 18 minutes or less.
Exactly. So it's just a much faster interaction that it takes for this to happen. It's putting it in sear, you might as well just put it on the fire. It's the same thing, right? But if putting it in milk, that takes a much longer period of time. Yavni, I saw you light up. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, a question. And when it says kidin maliach kerotech, is that because it's like because the sear is a salty thing, then it's like according to the rule that maliach kerotech, then it acts like tseli and it is oser kedei klipa, or is it like just by analogy?
No, exactly, right. It's because of that rule that we got at the beginning here, which we haven't spent a lot of time with, but maliach harehu keroteach, right? That the which is oser kedei klipa. So if you have salt, you have a very quick interaction with something that's incredibly salty, right? Which I believe in another, I don't remember if it's in this Siman or a different Siman. We'll get into how much that is, but not today. Then usually it's like making an edible. Then that does a kedei klipa amount of Easter. So like there's a penetration of flavor for a klipa amount. So
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're really talking about is that we're making an analogy in the time it takes. In other words, when we do maliach to meat or whatever, it has to be a certain amount of time, also about 18 minutes. In other words, this shiur, the shiur is like the shiur of sleep, of maliach.
Oh, that would make sense. Yeah. So
but even if it's
less than 18 minutes, it's just like roteach would be less than that. It would just do kedei klipa, and if it's more than that, it would be a full interaction. So, great. So Yavni, did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, good. So that's there. Do we do the Rashba already? We haven't done the next piece in the Rashba. That was the Rosh. Andres, keep going a little bit more in the Beit Yosef. Katav HaRashba.
כתב הרשב"א, כל הכבושים הרי הם כמבושלים. כלומר, לעניין שטעם האיסור מתפתת בחולו כדרך שמתפתת בבישול, ואינו ניתר בנטילת מקום כצלי. וכך הם דברי רבן. Should I read the Badak Abait?
Good. Right. So this is the Rashba. It says all kavush is completely like mevushal, that it's through the entire thing. Don't think that it only penetrated some amount but didn't go all the way. The flavor completely interacted with it, and this is with the Torah rules as well, right? We saw that as well. So, do the better.
No, also.
What was that? Yeah. But I mean, the Rashba doesn't know the Shulchan Aruch. He knows,
afterwards. Yeah.
And nor does the Beit Yosef doesn't know the Shulchan Aruch yet. It's in his future, not in his past at this point. So, okay, read the Bedek Habayit that he adds later.
כתב רבנו ירוחם, כבוש הרי הוא כמבושל, זולתי בשר וחלב ואפילו הוא לי כולי יומא שרי, עד כאן לשון. ונראה לי דהיינו להיתר הנאה, אבל לעולם אסור באכילה, וצריך עיון. So he's reminding again the first source we saw about the chidush of basar v'chalav, that this kavush k'mevushal doesn't apply to them because they should be mutar, but they are mutar only to ana'ah, but it's forbidden to eat them. Like it's not
exactly. Great. This is the problem. Rabbeinu Yerucham writes that kavush mushal doesn't apply to basar b'chalav. And he says, wait a second, that's a little bit problematic. But he says, no, it must be, what he means is it doesn't apply from a hana'ah perspective. So you can, give that basar that sat in the milk for 24 hours to your dog, but you can't eat it, right? That's asur d'Rabbanan potentially. So, and we'll see this when we get to basar b'chalav, that things, that basar b'chalav interactions that are only on Isur d'Rabbanan level may seem to lose their Isur hana'ah quality to them. So. But just a future thing. Okay, I want to look at the Darchei Moshe Aleph on this because I think he is something very important to teach us. I think he always has something very important to teach us, but particularly here. Sarah, you haven't read yet. Wow, you skipped I skipped you somehow.
No, I've been hold on 1 second. Actually, my headphones just have to switch to the right headphone here. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Darchei Moshe Aleph.
Okay, great. כתב באיסור בהיתר הארוך כלל למד, כל כבוש כממושל דאורייתא, ולכן ספק אם נכבש יום שלם, ספקו דאורייתא, לחומרא, אבל כבוש בשר וחלב, הווי דרבנן, וספקא דרבנן לכולה. So he's basically going to resolve this like potential problem between the text about the soaking things in milk by saying like that's a suffix derabanan, and so that can be lakula, but this other the case with the putting it in like general pickling, that would be deoraita, so then we have to go l'chumra in that case.
Exactly. So I don't know if it was a 24-hour period or not. I have to treat it l'chumra if it's not basar b'chalav. So okay, keep going.
עוד כתב, חתיכה שנפלה מקצתה לחלב ומקצתה לחוץ לחלב, מה שבתוכה אסור ומה שבחוץ מותר, ואין חלב מפפה למעלה בצונן, עד כאן לשונו. I think this is fat, not milk, yeah.
I think it might be, it's hard to say.
It might be milk, yeah. It's not clear to me.
Yeah.
Okay, but either way, you have a piece of something that falls into chaylev, let's say that, or let's say milk, falls into milk. Some of it's in, some of it's out. What's inside is asur, what's outside is mutar, because it doesn't spread from upwards in cold.
Exactly, which might be different from bishul, right? This might be where there's a split here a little bit of that. It doesn't, anything above the liquid line doesn't have interaction with it. So. Okay, but keep going.
Right. Okay. So now I actually do think
makes more sense than challah.
It has to be milk. It has to be milk because
Right,
it's basically saying, yeah, I think it has to be milk. Right, because it's basically saying like, imagine the case in the Gemara, but instead of it soaking all the way, it's only soaks partially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Wait,
Okay.
why does that mean it has to be milk?
Oh, sorry. I had a couple questions. Yavni, go for it.
How did you clarify that it has to be milk?
So I think that it's trying to describe a case that is it's basically the same case as the case in the Gemara, but you don't know that
pickle
it's
in fat. You don't pickle in fat.
You don't pickle in fat. You
pickle in a liquid.
Yeah,
you pickle in a liquid.
Chaylev isn't probably a liquid in terms of this whole thing we're talking about here. Did this come up last week where there's a question of if it's congealed or not, right, with Siman? I think it's in I think it's Siv Gimel in Kuf Dalet, if I remember correctly, right? So when it's a cold fat, animal fats, we generally don't consider it to be a liquid. We consider it to be a solid for the sake of kavush, right? So, okay.
So they don't seem to know about capillary action. It's really the upshot of this, right?
Well, no, this is the interesting thing. It seems to be that there are cases,
or they're just saying that it doesn't go that far.
Exactly. So,
okay.
Sorry, I'm confused.
Yes, please.
The Darchei Moshe afterwards in the Shulchan Aruch says the opposite?
Of And the Shulchan Aruch, he says that there's a debate about this. We'll keep going, and then we'll
Yeah,
come
well,
back.
there's the other side, right?
Yeah,
Right.
go for it.
V'hagaot sham, b'shem maharish dechula asur, that all of it's asur. Dichvush kemevushal umitbashet. So the opposite is right. You might think that if it's really kemevushal, then it spreads just the same way it would be if we were cooking it. Umitbashet shapir bekulo afilu al yadei tonin kan lashono. Vayen liels siman samachtet.
Yeah, so good. He's leaving this open. We'll see. But Andres, as you put it, that he's gonna have to make a decision when he gets to the Ramah, when he is the Ramah, when he gets to the Mapah and the Shulchan Aruch, right? Is to actually how do we rule here? But so far he's brought both opinions, that either it doesn't go all the way up or it does go all the way up. So, but I wanted to leave that out there. It's important to kind of know. All right, how are we doing on time? Yeah, I want to do one more piece on the Beit Yosef, because I think it's good. So that's going to close the book for the moment, not really, but let's pretend to close the book on kavush, or put a bookmark in it. We're going to go on to the question of bet in the tour. So I'll read bet, and then we'll go to the Beit Yosef. Ve'im hucham shayad nichvet bo az oser kamo mevushal. Right, is a whole big question what this is going to mean. He says, but if it's so hot that you burns the hand, right, then it is oser in the same way that cooking does. Right. Sounds like that is cooking, but we'll get there. All right. Katav harashba. Yesh omrim she'ein maflit elachom shel kli rishon shehu mevashel. Right. The Rashba says there are those who say that there is no exusion of flavor unless it's there's only exusion of flavor if it's in a kli rishon, right? Which is what cooks. Aval kli sheni v'chein irui shehu kichli sheni eino maflit. But if it's in a kli sheni or it's pouring from a kli rishon into a kli sheni, right, which is like a kli sheni, the Rashba says that doesn't impart flavor. That's a better word. All right, Vilo Nehira. This is the Rashba still speaking. It doesn't make any sense. Sherei chom shel beta shlita v'chom chelev hakasalim maflit shem bechutim mikli sheni. He says, but we have cases where if you're shechting an animal, there's a whole discussion about why the knife doesn't become asur. For instance, there seems to be at the beginning of the first chapter of Chulin, I think it is. It seems to be that these things which are less hot than a kli sheni impart flavor. So how could you ever say that a kli sheni doesn't impart flavor? Right? Ela kol chom she'al yidei eish maflit afilu ein hayad let it bo adkan. So, and what does the Rashba say? He says it must be that if it's a kli rishon, it doesn't even have to be that hot. It still imparts flavor, right? It doesn't have to be so hot that your hand recoils from it, right? And presumably then it would be for a kli sheni though, if it's yad let it bo, it does cook, and it does therefore cause a problem in terms of imparting flavor. All right, this is the tour is going to pick up again. Right? He says, wait a second. The tour says that those cases are not comparable, right? Because those cases of shchita and the chelev kasalim, that's only a kedei klipa interaction. So throw those out. All right. And so I really don't get what the Rashba is saying, but then he's going to try and explain. Right? He says maybe what he means to say is that when you have a hot interaction, that only does kedei klipa, right? I saw some books that have that, but that's not the case in the Torah rules. He says it is when it's cham, it's aser kulo if it's as hot as yad solepo. All right. And actually, I'll just read the next part in the Torah, and then we'll go back. He says, Lefichach, nafal isur cham letoch heter cham, or afilu isur sonen letoch heter cham, hakol asur de tata gavar. So if you have a hot interaction or a cold into hot interaction, the whole thing becomes asur because the bottom thing is the dominant factor. Aval. Aval pi she'atachton heter kivan shu cham gover al elyon umechamamo ad shemaflit betachton. And even if the lower thing that's hot is the permissible thing, right? Since its heat is what is important, is the dominant factor over the top thing, and it heats it up, and so the cold isur now imparts flavor into the lower heter, and everything becomes asur. Assuming, right, there's no 60 here. Kol sheken imatachton cham isur. And all the more so is this the case if the bottom thing is the isur that's hot. Aval imayon cham betachton sonen as eno aser kulo afilu imayon hacham isur שהתחתון גובר על העליון, מצננו עד שאינו מפליט איסורו בכל התחתון, אלא כדי קליפה לבד. וכל שכן עם העליון שהוא חם היתר. Right? And he says, and whether or not I'll just do a summary, the top or the bottom is the isur, it doesn't matter. If the top thing is the only hot thing, the bottom thing is cold, all you have is kedei klipa, and not a complete isur at that point. So, okay, that's the tour. Aaron, go for it.
It might be a stupid question, but
Andres, we'll take Aaron first and then come back to you. And there are no stupid questions. So, Aaron.
This may also be a stupid question, and it may have been answered while I was in the bathroom, but if I have a solid isser that's cham falling into a cold heter that is liquid, what would it mean that the liquid is aser k'dei klipa? Or is that not where that would apply?
No, this is a huge question, and it's a very important one. I don't remember if we're going to see this today or not, but there are several achronim who rule that klipa is only. This is actually an important point. I haven't written in my tour here, right? Kedei klipa is a chumrah. This is one way to look at it. It's not what everyone agrees on, but it's a chumrah, and therefore, if you can't do it, right, then you're okay. It really, as opposed to like kedei netila, which really seems to me maybe more like a kula on that it's all asur. Which seems counterintuitive because kedei klipa is less than kedei netila, but nonetheless, the lesser thing is actually the chumrah of a case where really there's no interaction, but we're just we're being machmir and taking a layer off if we can. So if it's efshar.
But didn't you say that the Aruch HaShulchan says that it's always a case of the bottom one being a liquid? Then there would never be a case.
So go ahead, Rav Nachum.
No, I was just saying. But then wouldn't that mean that it would never be a case of klipa? That's by kavush, but not by tata gavar.
Yeah. By kavush, he says that. So sorry, I didn't clarify.
Well, kavush is always in a liquid, of course.
Of course, yes, yeah. It's kind of obvious, but
I thought you were saying that the din of tata gavar he's saying is only by liquids, where the bottom.
Yeah, no, the reason he says that. I think someone must say somewhere. I didn't see where they say that. Is that if you have two cold solids sitting on each other for 24 hours, right? That maybe there's a worry there. Yeah, and that's why. That's
okay. I misunderstood you.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. That's yeah, and so there are the idea is that if it's a liquid, and here of course, right, you could have two solids interact. One is cham and one is cold, and there kedei klipa is possible. Or also, right, of course, if it's a hot liquid that's the isur on the bottom and it's a heter that falls into it, right, that's solid, you can pull it out and do klipa on it, and then you'd be fine. But if you can't do it, Aaron, potentially, then there are a lot of people out there who say it's mutar, nonetheless. So. Okay, good. And then Andres, you had a question too.
No, I was just wondering what was the theme that connected kavush kemevushal and then bet in the tour.
Oh, good. I think why does he organize it this way? I think these are all questions of interactions, right? When do the interactions become problematic, right? Case one, we're starting with cold. Right. Case two, what about cold hot? Right. So that's the reason I think that's my sense. I mean, unfortunately, I really wish the tour had gone back and written like a whole thing of why did he organize things the way he did. But I think someone correct me, I think a lot of your idea is based on the Torah Tabayit organizationally. So okay. With that, let's do some Beit Yosef. Yeah, I think we have a little time. So we're going to bet in the Beit Yosef here. Maybe Alana, do you want to read for us?
Okay. ואם הוא חם שהיד סולדת בו, אז אוסר כמו מבושל.
Yeah, I just want to point out that the version of the tour we have says nichavet. Here, the Beit Yosef says soleret. I'm not sure if there's a girsa issue here necessarily, and if the girsa is in the tour or in the Beit Yosef. So, Lexi, you had a thought on that?
Well, no, I mean, just because both of those languages show up in the different Gemaras, so I imagine it would be a very easy scribal error to make.
Yeah. So, nor am I 100% sure it makes a huge difference, right? In terms of temperature.
I think that the Chachmas Adam does differentiate between them halachically. That yad nechuyabo is a higher level of heat.
So it's a higher temperature than
the higher temperature. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there may be halachic differences according to him. Yeah.
So Okay, wow.
If you look at the Haggad Ve'arot, it seems to be saying that it's a mistake, and yet you should be saying Shehayad Nichvet.
Okay, I mean that's what our version of the tour has, so it's yeah. This might
No,
be
I'm saying on the Bet Yosef.
yeah. So and this I've always heard, I don't know, I've heard different versions of what Yad Soledet is, everywhere from like 115 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not holding in all the exact numbers on it, but so well, we will get there is right. The Gemara actually defines it as the temperature of oil at which it will burn a baby's stomach, which is no more helpful to me in terms of understanding what that temperature actually is. But all right, Alana, go for it. Read the Beit Yosef for us.
Okay. Pashutu delav akavush desamichle kai ela hachi ka'amar isur shenitarev beheter bitzonen im shaha betocho yom shalem chashiv kemevushal ve'im hu cham shehayad nichvet bo kevan shenafal letocho oser kemo mevushal ve'ika lemedak b'mai mairi I b'kli rishon mai oser kemo mevushal dekamar hazehu bishul atzmo. Ve'i b'kli sheni afilu yad soled bo eino mevashel ukmo shekatav katvu hatosvot beperek kira. That's the tosvot that we saw. Ahad zemesik shmamina kli sheni eino mevashel. Should I stop there?
Okay. But you can do a little bit more.
Okay. V'chein nir'eh midivrei Rabbeinu atzmo b'tor Orach Chaim, Siman Shin Yud Chet.
Yeah, which is Hilchot Shabbat of cooking. So yeah.
Right. Okay. V'dochak lechalek ben bishol inyan Shabbat lebishol ha'isurim.
Give us a summary of that, if you could.
I'm not sure I can, but so he's saying there's something obvious about what we're saying. If we're talking about an isur that's nitarev an isur that's nitarev beheter, if we're talking about it being hot, then why do we care if it's a kli rishon? If it's a kli rishon, then obviously it's bishul. And if it's a kli sheni, we know from the Tosfot that kli sheni is a no mevashel. So what case are we talking about here?
Exactly. So, and we're in the speech, I think it's important to say, v'dochak lechalek ben bishul inyan Shabbat levishul ha'isurin, right? He says it's difficult to say that there's a split.
Different shear for bishul when we're talking about, right, which is sort of what we were saying when we talked about bliya before.
Exactly. So.
But there's one thing I just didn't understand the beginning. Is he saying that this is not talking about kavush that we were talking about before? What is he saying in the beginning?
Is this kind of who was it? Was it Ruben who asked the question, or Andrew's like, how did they get from Aleph to Bet in the? Is
that what he's doing? Yeah.
He's kind of he's saying, don't think we're still talking about kavush.
That's right. Okay.
He's like kavush is cold interaction, and now we've moved on to well, when is it actually? What happens in hot interactions when it becomes so hot that it's yad nichvet bo, which by the way is probably a boundary, right? Up until that point, it is potentially kavush. Although we saw in the Rashba already, maybe not, right? If it's kli rishon, and in if it's more than that, it becomes a bishul type interaction. So. But Sarah, yeah, go for it.
It just seemed like the other thing that he's saying is he's just asking why if we know from the Tosfot already that temperatures are not really relevant, what's relevant is kli rishon and kli sheni, why didn't he just say that?
Yeah, well, in other words,
yeah.
What does it mean, kamo mevushal, right?
Yeah. Why doesn't he just say like?
Yeah, so.
Right, and also when he says v'im hu cham shehayad nichvet bo, he could just say v'im hu b'kli, like if it's kli rishon this, if it's kli sheni that, like be done, right? And don't reintroduce these categories that the Tosfot is already kind of dispensed with.
Yeah.
Well, the question that goes back to my earlier question on Tosfot. Were they dispensing with it to begin with? Maybe they were just saying, in general, a kli rishon happens to be something that hayad to let it go, but not necessarily. That can also be the case for a kli sheni.
Yeah, I mean, they seem to be basing off the Gemara that says where it was shmamina kli sheni eino mevashel, right? Right. Actually, that's the Tosfot's conclusion from the Gemara. Sorry, it's not that the Gemara itself says that. So, but
you could stick in like kli sheni but alma or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see how the Beit Yosef unwraps all this. Rav Nachum, it looks like you wanted to say something too. So.
I mean, I'm just saying though, it's not clear what the who is in the tour. when he says im hu ham. What thing is it? Is it a kli rishon or is it a kli sheni? That's all he's asking. He's asking, what are we talking about? Because if we're talking about a kli rishon, then it shouldn't matter that it's yad soledet bo. It should be bishul. And if it's not, and if it's or say, what's the chiddush? Sorry, that's really what he's saying. If it's kli rishon, then what's the chiddush? Obviously, if yad soledet bo and it's kli rishon, so it must be kli sheni. But if it's kli sheni, we know a din that there's no bishul in kli sheni. So what are you telling me? There's bishul in kli sheni. There's no din of bishul. There's no din of bishul in kli sheni. So this case makes no sense. It can't be kli rishon because it's obvious, and it can't be a kli sheni because the din would be wrong. There's no bishul in kli sheni. That's all he's saying.
Yes. So we're going to see the Beit Yosef is going to come up with a particular situation that's like in between kli rishon and kli sheni. That is let's call it kli rishon, but it's different than you might have expected.
Yeah, but you have several languages here. Once you get into a language of a klal, but then you have before that the language of empirical. And so then when they start mixing and you're moving from empiricism to a rule-oriented, you're making a big move. And it's hard to get it straight.
Yeah. It's also interesting because I think the Tosfot is kind of doing both of those in that Tosfot.
You're right. That's exactly what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, we have a rule that seems to be the cliche doesn't cook. And now, but here's what we actually experience is that, well, the walls are cold. So, and so they're creating a system based on that.
And on top of that, we have the fact that Bishul is the paradigm. And we try to get things as close as possible to Bishul. So are we doing that on the basics of some sort of klal, or are we doing on the basis of some form of empiricism? What takes over from where? So they're working it through.
Yeah. So
or we're working it through.
We're working it through. So
we're working it through.
Great. So Alana, keep going for the Nir Eli in the Beit Yosef.
Okay. V'nir Eli shekatav kach mishum de stam bisholu b'kli rishon be'odo al ha'or. Ve'ata lememar de lashna kli rishon be'odo al ha'or. Losh lashna achar shenistalek min ha'or. Lashna kli sheni. Kol shehayad soledabo oser kimavushal. Ve'im ein hayad soledabo eino oser kimavushal. So he's saying the reason that what is the Torah trying to say with this kind of language? It's that we generally think of bishul as whatever happens when the pot is on the kli rishon's on the fire, but actually it doesn't matter if it's on the fire or off the fire, but still very hot temperature, or if it's in a kli sheni and it's yad soledet bo. In all those cases, it's like it's cooking. I think
exactly
if it's hot.
Yeah, if it's
hot. Right. No. In all those cases, it's hot. Right. It's a kli rishon that's still hot but not on the fire, or or a kli sheni that's yad soledet bo.
So good. I'm going to skip you now. We're going to skip. It's the next page for me in the Beit Yosef, but it's still under the same thing towards the end.
But you see what I just want to point out, what he's preserving here. Just let me just say one quick comment. He's preserving here that kli sheni. Well, I mean, no, I take it back. He's getting rid of the din that kli sheni is ein mevashel. He's saying kli sheni does mevashel in certain circumstances, even though in Shabbos we said it didn't.
Exactly. Yeah, this is going to be his whole problem, which we're going to skip a bunch of his kind of discussion of this because I want to get to the kind of the bottom line of it. And so I have it's on the next, for me, it's the next page, and it starts with I have a parentheses of usfirali, and then as an acronym, and then I have brackets as V'nir Eli, which is what we read, and that's where I want to pick back up on the Beit Yosef. So maybe once people find it, they can give me a thumbs up.
Joel, can you say that again?
Yeah, so mine has parentheses and it has Vav Samech Chupchik Lamed, and then in brackets it is Vav Nun Chupchik Lamed. That's where I want to.
First wider line.
For my version also, it's the first wider line on the next page of the Beit Yosef. So, but people have it. It looked like I saw some thumbs there. So, all right, Ilana, can you keep going for us?
Yeah, sure. V'nir Ali de afilu ma'aler tichut bekli sheni ke'ein shaya bekli rishon eino mevashel dechlal gadol hu dekli sheni eino mevashel b'shum panim. De'im lokain lo havyala letamuda listom velomar kli sheni eno mavashel. So this is where he's coming up against the klal. Like before, he wanted to say that, okay, if kli sheni is, in what we just read, if kli sheni is yad soledapo, then we can consider it bishul. But he doesn't want to say that because, you know, that whatever even if that may be our sense, like empirically, we have this klal that kli sheni eno mavashel.
Can I jump in? I think before he was explaining the tour, and now
Yes, he is. Yeah.
and now
Yeah.
he's not explaining the tour anymore, and he's saying his own opinion. And he's saying it's true that the tour says all that matters is whether it's kli, if it's hot or not hot.
That's
I don't
a
care what pot it's in. But I disagree. I say kli sheni is eno mevashel, and that's a klal gadol b'Torah.
So yeah, and this is actually one of those interesting cases where the Beit Yosef is ruling not based on the Rosh, the Rambam, and the Rif. He probably doesn't have obvious opinions from them, but he actually has to go back to the Gemara and say, hey, the Gemara here is kind of opaque about this, and if it's opaque, it's got to be that it wasn't going to fool us, right? So it must be the Kli Sheni of Vashel, right? But he's not done, so keep going.
Okay. Aval kashe al zeh shekatav Rabbeinu lekaman besamuch al divrei harashba bechli sheni oser kulo im hayad solerapo. Lechach nireh de Rabbeinu hacha mayri bein kli rishon bein kli sheni dechol shayad solerapo asur she'afal pi she'ino mevashel mavlia umafli. Okay, so he's trying to come up with some way of like keeping everyone happy or satisfying everything, and he says, okay, so I'm going to still say that kli sheni, like we have this problem with kli sheni shayad soledapo. We have the Gemara that says it's eno mevashel, but what if it's really so hot? Oh well, we can make this chiluk between mavlia maflit and bishul, like blia versus bishul. We can say kli sheni is still not mevashel, but it's exuding and absorbing and exuding flavor.
And therefore, I'm sorry, just finish the sentence. What does that lead to?
Well, therefore, it has status of isur when it comes to like dine isur veter, but maybe not for Shabbat because it's not bishul.
Exactly. Yeah. So
and not for Basar B'chalav.
Yeah. So.
And not right.
Yes, it's the three categories we have here now, right?
So do we go by empirical truth? Do we go by rabbinic cloud making? Rabbi?
Are you asking me? I think
you're the rabbi.
I think here we're now going by.
I'm too close to Nachum to ask him that. I'll ask you.
I think we're going by empirical truth, right? We know it's mavli or maflit. So who cares if it's if we have a klal? That klal is only for Shabbat. We're going to push it to the Shabbat category, but not to the category of transfer flavor.
Because we have to be from a Shabbos. Okay, great.
But we're saying a kli rishon is mevushal even if anos hayat.
We're saying here that a kli sheni is mevashel, even if even when it's yad soledapo. When it's yad soledapo, kli sheni is mevashel. Right, not mevashel. Yes, mavlia or maflit. It's not mevashel, but it is oser. Let's put it that way.
I've gotten that for kli sheni, but what about for a kli rishon? If a kli rishon is not yad soledapo.
He has not. We haven't seen him rule on this at this point. That's the next case, actually. So,
but I mean, we're doing a nice thing. We're preserving the term kli sheni eno mevashel. It's not called bishul. Bishul is a special technical term, but it does do other things. It causes isur to transfer, but it's not called bishul.
So good.
But we've moved down to a degree then the overarching or overwhelming understanding of bishul is everything. In other words, we have another category. That's what you're telling me.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Yeah, that's the compromise.
So, all right, I want to. We can do this. I want to go to the Shulchan Aruch now. I want to see how he rules, and I want to move on to Sifim Gimel and Dalet. We did a little bit of Gimel. We did it in the tour. And then maybe to a couple of the Nosei Kelim if we have some time, Emir Hashem, but we may not. So,
Joel, I think Yavne has been trying to say something.
Oh, Yavne, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Yavne.
That's okay. No, this conclusion makes sense to me from the Beit Yosef. It just seems to be in tension with what he said earlier, that he said dochak lechalek ben bishul inyan Shabbat lebishul isurin, because practically that like blian kita is what we have cared about Bishul Be'isurin for, unless you're going to say it's like specifically about the question of Basar B'chalav, which didn't seem to be what he was talking about.
The
Yeah, no.
unified field theory doesn't always work. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, I think he has to at least claim the Torah gives it up. Whether or not he himself gives it up is going to be another question. So we'll see that. So, but I think his only way to explain the Torah is he has to use what he thinks is dochak at the end of the day and say that there is a distinction. So, okay, with that, let's go to Kuf Hey in the Shulchan Aruch. I'll read. Hope people don't mind. All right, starting from the beginning. All right, Isur shenishre im heter me'et la'et betzonen ikre kavush v'arehu kimvushal v'nesar kulo aval pachot mikan b'hadacha sage. Right, so he says, right, if you cold interaction, Isur is sitting in heter, is marinated in heter for 24 hours. That's called kavush. It's like bishul. Everything is asur, all the liquid. But less than that, all you have to do is wash it off. All right. So there, the hadacha would seem to be where that's the heter and isur. It seems a little bit weird in terms of writing. And this is actually really interesting because Rav Nachum points out to us before the Gemara just specified at least 24 hours is like bishul. Here the Beit Yosef is saying no, there's like a very distinctive line, like 23 hours and 59 minutes and 59 seconds hadacha, right? 24 hours. Then it's asur, so which is kind of fascinating. All right, I'm going to go on to the Ramah for the moment. Haga b'chol makom di'amrina and kavush kivushal afilu ma shechutz lekvisha asur al yedei kvisha shelamata mefafel lamala kamo bebishul v'yesh makilim b'mashi b'chutz. All right. We saw this in the Darchei Moshe. He brought both opinions about whether or not what's outside the liquid in a case of kavush does the capillary theory work or not? Does it gain the flavor? And there are those who are mekil, but he initially says that we are machmir about it. All right. And then he says, "V'safek kavush asur milvad bebasarim chalav dezlinan lakula the minatora eno aser rak bevishul mamash." And just like we saw in the Darchei Moshe again, if it's a safek about whether or not kavush happened, in all cases, but basar b'chalav we go lechumra, basar b'chalav we go lakula. Okay, that's Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch. There's some good notes. For the moment, I'm going to press on, and maybe we'll come back. Oh, it's not done with Aleph. We're still going. Sorry. Ve'imu kavush betoch sir o betoch chometz im sheha kedei shitnenu ala or v'yartiach v'yatchil bashel harehu kivushal. All right, and he says this is like we saw this from the Rosh, right? But here we have both sir and chometz. The Rosh just talked about sir. If you put it in brine or vinegar, if it's enough time that it would have, if you put it on a fire, it would have boiled, or not boiled, it would have heated up, let's say, and begin to cook. That is like mevushal. Pachot mishur zeh lo nesar ela kedei klipa, right? And if it's less than that, then it's klipa. It's exactly what we saw from the Rosh. All right, nothing new there. All right, I'm moving on to bet for the moment. We may come back. Chom shel kli rishon shayad soledet bo mevashel ve'oser kulo. Right, the heat of a kli rishon, where it's enough that your hand recoils from it, that is bishul, and it's oser everything. Right. Aval chom shel kli sheni eno mevashel, but kli sheni doesn't do bishul. V'yesharim shegam ken eno maflit uvelo mavlia. Here you see the chiluk, right? And he says, and there are those people who say not only does it not cook, it also doesn't do a flavor transfer. V'yesharim demekol makom hu maflit umavlia ve'oser kedei klipa. Right, he says, and there are those who say it does do flavor transfer, but only enough to do a klipa, and you should be machmir lechatchila in these cases. So, aval b'diavad mutar below klipa v'adacha be'al masage. He says, but if it's a b'diavad case, you don't have to do klipa, and you can do hadacha, and you're fine. So, okay, that's bet in the Shulchan Aruch. I'm going to move on to Gimel, and then we'll do a little bit of Nosei Kelim, hopefully. All right. Nafal Isur Cham L'toch Heter. Cham Dekli Heter Cham Dekli Rishon. So you have a hot Isur falling into a hot Heter in a Kli Rishon. Or Afilu Isur Sonen L'toch Heter Cham. Or even if the Isur is cold into the hot Heter. Hakol Asur de Tata Gavar Alayon. Right. Umechamamo ad shemaflit betachton. right? Ve'en sarich lamar deheter tzonen latoch isur cham shakol asur. Aval im ha'elyon cham ve'atachton tzonen eno aser ele kedei klipa afilu im ha'elyon cham ha'elyon ha'cham isur, right? So just like we had in the tour, it just matters if the bottom thing is hot or not. As to whether or not it's considered a hot interaction and it's oser akol, or if it's kedei klipa. If the bottom one is cold, it's kedei klipa. If the hot one, as long as the hot one is hot, and otherwise it's oser akol. All right, same thing we had in the tour. No difference, I don't think. All right, but the haga I think is important. V'chol haga v'chol ze lo ma'ire ela b'chom kli rishon kigon. Miyad she'sira min ha'esh, sira min ha'esh, manicho al im ha'eter. Right, this is all dealing with if when it's kli rishon heat. Aval im kvar munach b'kli sheni ve'achar kach miniach ha'eter etzlo or alav eno oser klal. The kli sheni eno oser kemo shenit ba'er. Right, but if it's a kli sheni, even if the bottom's hot, right, that's kli sheni heat, and that it doesn't oser at all. Right, because kli sheni doesn't oser, like we explained, which seems to be kind of the Ramah going a little different way here from the Mechaber. In some ways, I almost say this it's on Gimel, but it's also kind of on Bet going on here. So, and he says keeps going. So what about those were all vertical interactions? What about horizontal interactions? Im shnehem chamim michom kli rishon hakol asur. V'im ha'echad sonen ha'echad sonen ha'heter tzarich klipa b'mkom shenaga. All right, shenaga isur shenicho shenaga. All right, he says, so if it's a horizontal interaction, you have like two pieces of hot meat, right? If they're both hot, like from a kli rishon, then everything is asur. But if one of them is cold, then you just need to take klipa in the place where they touched each other, right? That's very different than we saw. Well, it's not so different. It's in that case as if the cold thing was always on the bottom. It's the same that way if it's horizontal. All right. And isur shenicho b'chli heter o lehefech amrinan be gam ken din tata gavar. So what if you put an isur in a kli heter, right? Or you put a heter in a kli isur? Then again, tata gavar applies. All right, kamosh b'shtei chatichot, just like two pieces of meat, right? But and is vayen le'el b'siman sadik daled if im chatach basar b'sakin cholev. We'll get to that of what happens if you cut a piece of meat with a milk knife. All right, and he says one final thing: asur le'rot mikli sheyesh bo shuman kasher lener dolek sheyesh bo chelev o shuman isur. Right, that you can't pour from a kli with animal fat that's kasher into a lamp that is using oil that's not kasher to eat, right? All right. Uvediavad ein lachush, but at in a b'diavad case, they don't worry about that. That was a Ramah that I signed to people, but we didn't get a chance to do in class. Okay, good. I'm going to pause here. Just we've seen a lot in the Shulchan Aruch. We haven't seen Daled yet, but which is just to sleep. But I do want to do a few things on Aleph through Gimel, if that's okay, in the 9 minutes I have left. Any questions? Any thoughts? Okay, a couple of quick things. We'll get other people to read. You heard a lot of my voice. I want to start not in a usual place. I want to go back to Aleph, and I want to go to Chidushei Rebbe Akiva Eger, because I think this is important halachically. When the Dibur Matchil is me'et le'et betzonen, right? So what the kavush happens when it sits for 24 hours in a cold interaction. Maybe Rav Lexi, you want to read for us?
Yeah, sorry. Can you?
Which letter? Which letter?
So I don't. Mine doesn't have letters. It's on Seif Aleph, and the Dibur Matchil is me'et le'et betzonen.
So that's
Okay.
Aleph.
Okay.
It's the eight betzonen. Sorry,
It's the first one on Siman Kufay. So
yes. Sorry, for some reason, maybe go to somebody else because I am not seeing
great.
it.
Jessica,
I've got it.
Oh, you got it. Go for it. Thanks, Alan.
מאית לצונן, באותן מים, אבל אם שפכם להמים תוך מאית לעת, ושפך לתוכו מים אחרים, אף ששורה מאית לעת בצירוף, למקרה כבוש. מן חטא. וכן כתב השח, ונקודת הכסף, etc. ושבת צדקה, כמדומה נוהגים להתיר אם נלקח החטיפה תוך מעת לעת זמן מועט. אפילו אם החזיר החתיכה לאותם המים עצמן, כל שלא נישרו מעת לעת בפעם אחת בלי הפסק.
Wow, what a heter.
Yeah, I know. This is huge.
Whoa, whoa.
So, Alan,
need to have-
summarize it.
You need to have the same water and the same time.
Exactly. Yes. Right.
need
You
to-
take it out. You take
Take
it out
of
for
the
a
middle and put it back in the same water.
You-
It's
You
considered
take it
two
out to
separate-
look at it. You take it out to wave it around like a flag and put it back. What a heter. Whew.
And also
Yeah.
the other way, if you dump out the
Was this a
water-
religious man?
This Rebbe Akiva Eger, I don't know. Like, clearly he's a reformer, but yeah, I mean that's it's like one of those things. It's like you see Rebbe Akiva Eger said it, right? It's like, yeah, it seems like something to rely on. So, but all right, it's kind of interesting too, right? It's a limitation kind of the kind of this idea that there's this process that's going on the whole time, and if you interrupt that process, it seems to reset it. Which is kind of amazing.
Like
So
the
we can deal with this later, but it seems like this might interact with the principles of the Batal and Isser L'Chachila, right?
That you're like intentionally. I think here you're just stopping interaction from happening in a different way.
Right, as in it wouldn't have been Nassar in the first place. And also, even if this isn't, it doesn't seem like it's necessarily telling you to do this, but saying like also that if you had done this, this is what the dean would be.
Yeah.
And also, it's not his own chiddush; he's quoting people.
Yeah. Oh no, he didn't make this up. Yeah, it's but
Yeah, but it shows it to be so fragile. I mean, the momentary interruption is such a fragile process. It's not real bishul, it's something kibishul. So
Well,
at least you got to get it right.
What if you're soaking your glasses before Pesach or whatever, or I mean, in non-kosher glasses, then you pour the water in it, and if it spills out after 12 hours, then you put in new water. Did you lose a day?
It sounds like this could be l'chumra too, right? That would be the case, right? In a koshering process,
Yeah,
that you have to make sure that you change the water not before 24 hours, right? That your change has to be after 24 each time, and otherwise it could be very problematic.
except that we already have the Sephardic heter, so.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of ways to combine other shitot here, right? And we already saw even in the Gemara, maybe it was just letting it sit in the same water for 3 days, right? It's but yeah, this is it's like for every kula there's a chumrah that goes with it, right? It's so good. I wanted to look. Let's see. 4 minutes. Let's see if I can do something. Yeah. Let's go to the Shach Sif Katan Chet. We're going to skip a little bit here. I just want to point everybody. It's worth it if you have time. Hopefully, everyone looked at this before. And the first Taz on this Siman is really worth it. And if you want a good summary of it, the Ber Hetev does a wonderful summary of it. He always does a wonderful summary, I think, but in particular, that Taz really is a question of what about like if I have like liquid sitting in an Isur Kli, right, for 24 hours, right? And the whole question of, well, on one hand, we have kavush kim vushal, but on the other hand, after 24 hours, everything becomes tam pagum, right? And so how do those two things interact with each other? Because there are some people who say that actually, no, that's problematic. And the Taz dealing with that question, which is a good question. Does it ever come into Kalim as
kavush happens after 24 hours. Before that, nothing happened. At the moment of exactly 24 hours is when kavush happens. And also pagam happens exactly after 24 hours. So the pot is pagam.
It's the Cinderella moment.
Exactly. Yeah. It's but I want to look at the Shach in Het, I think it was. Yeah. I have to find it too. which I
Ayin Gimel, right? Im Shnehem Chamim Mechom Kli Rishon.
Yeah, do we have enough time to do this? Yeah, we can start it. Alan, you're reading so well. Keep reading here. This is the whole question of if two things are hot from a Kli Rishon. In the Ramah, he said, but they're in a horizontal interaction, right? Not in a vertical interaction, then it's Oser Kulo.
Right.
Okay.
The Dat Marshal, Bisher Vehater Shalom, Uvesfaro, de Bedavar Gush, Kugan Fatichat Basar, Odag, O Orez, Odofen, de Ma'arin Famin Gdera, Imayatolebo, Dino Lalam, Keklirishan, the Ain Biadi Lachria. Machrimeli, Givan de Tosvat, Katu, Hatam Lachalek, Gan Klirishan, the Klishini, the Klirishan, Givan Shemad ala Or, Dofnotav, Famin, Machazik, Fomosman Rabet, in Kanira, the Hakol Talui, but Fanot. Imkain, the Vargush, Nami, Givan de Mikre Yavesh, La Shayach Bud Fanot. Kain Katav, Katif Bezer Behatar Haruf. The Bedvar Yavesh, Leka, the Fanot, Hamakara wrote in Avasha Lalam, Pozman, Shayatalabo, Ancient.
Good. I'm gonna stop you there and just have you explain. This is a big important point. So
You want me to summarize?
yeah, summarize. Yeah.
Right. So for a thick thing like piece of meat, etc. If if the others are about it falls into category of Kli Rishon. That was the Maharshal, but it seems to the Shach that the essence of the matter has to do with the walls, right?
Good. Which
so
I think he's supporting the Marshal here, right? This idea of the Vargush, right? Because there's no walls to cool it in a Kli Sheni, it continues to be Kli Rishon kind of forever. So does that make sense,
Right.
Alan? What I'm saying makes sense. So, and we haven't gotten to his maskana, but his maskana at the end of it is like that, right?
right. The Vargush Nami Kivan de Mikra Yavesh. This the thing doesn't have any. It doesn't have walls, so it can't be convert into a cliche anymore.
Exactly, right. So this is actually, I saw once, by the way, just maybe we'll end with this, I can't remember where it was in Rav Moshe Migrot Moshe. He has a whole question of if Devar Gush is always like a Kli Rishon and you have like a hot reheated piece of chicken, let's say on Shabbos, right? Because we have Ein Bishul Har Bishul for Devar Gush, right? But then you pour ketchup on it, which we do have a problem because we can't reheat liquids on Shabbos. And like a whole question of can you pour ketchup? He rules the heter at the end of it. I can't remember his entire reasoning, but it's kind
ketchup
of
ketchup is already cooked.
Yeah, well, yeah,
It's
but
a
we have
and it's charev.
Yeah, so but we do have there is bishul achar.
There is bishul
bishul
by
for
liquid.
Yeah, so not to the Rambam, everybody
It's not
else.
liquid.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's part of the thing. Is it really liquid and all that? So, but I just wanted to throw it out there as a Ilana. I saw your hand. Sorry.
Oh no, I just want. Can you just explain what the term gush is? Just a salad? What?
Yeah.
I don't. Okay.
Yeah, solid body, right?
Okay.
Wow.
Which is different than we have things that are like liquids. We have things that are like fats, which are somewhere in between, and then we have like a solid body.
Well, it's solid and it's kind of sticky and it's like a settlement. All right.
Wait,
All right,
Jacob,
I have to
want to say something? Wait, Jacob wanted to say something.
Oh, Jacob, sorry. Go ahead, Jacob.
No. Well, I just want to say thank you very much, Joel. Very, very good cheer. A lot of material to cover. Yishar Koyach. Can I just say one word of conclusion on this shach, which is that this shach, is that he's basically taking the Tosfot at his word. Tosfot said the walls cool it off, so he says, so the walls cool it off. Here we don't have you may have a dry piece with no touching of, but not really the walls are having much interaction. So it kind of limits what the Ramah said. The Ramah said, this is, if you pour it into a klisheni, then it's no longer a din of tata gavar. But yes, says the Shach, if you pour it into a klisheni, but if you place it in a klisheni, then we're back to square one. It is like Kli Rishon. Yeah. Lexi, you want to say something?
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say I also think with the Tosfot, it's not clear how much of it is the walls actively cooling it off so much as not holding their heat, right? As in that, like with things that are liquidy or whatever, they're more dependent on their container, right? Whereas he's saying like, yeah, like with a chunk of meat, the walls around it that are mostly not even touching or really holding its shape or things like that are just not having that much of an impact on its heat one way or another. They're not really preserving the heat that much or cooling it off.
Right.
Yeah. So I want to end just with one final word on, since we didn't do too much on Daled, but the whole idea of whether or not it for Sali, if it's kahush or shamen, right? That the Ramah rules, and I think it's very important, and I'll cover this on Thursday, people who come to Chazara. The Ramah rules that in Ashkenaz, we don't differentiate anymore. We assume that everything is fatty. In general, there's a few exceptions, but so.
We'll also get into this next week.
Oh, great. Awesome. So, and I think Rav Lexi and Sarah are both teaching next week. Is that right?
I think that's the idea. Minimally, we're hoping to do 5 to 8/5 also overlaps the 4 a lot. So we'll cover whatever wasn't covered today through 8 and hopefully also do 9.
Yeah, if we can.
We'll see. I will send out sources tomorrow.
Yeah, and I will at least send out sources for 9, but I'm not expecting to get all the way through 14.
No, I think that will definitely be us
by next week. So
we'll do the best we can.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll heat it up.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Go,
bye.
everyone.
Shikach.